All right, so if we can access this property, it should be pretty simple, right? We're just going to grab an integer from this and an integer from this and add them together. So let's just kind of do that. So what we need to do is take number1 field dot text, right? So that's the text of it, and we'll add number2 field dot text. Okay, pretty simple. And let's just have that print on the solution label dot text. So this is a simple like one-line solution, but let's give this a test and see what happens. So what we're saying is set the we already have a problem coming up here, but we'll see why that's an issue in a second. So we're taking dot text, we're taking this solution label, and we're saying change that solution label to equal the value of number1 field and the value of number2 fields added together. So the problem with adding these together is that these are strings. Remember that this is detecting the text in here. I can't actually pull that up for some reason, as a text field, and text is a string. It's a string. It's technically a string optional. That's what the question mark means. And we'll get into what optionals mean a little bit later. But we have this string right here. So we're saying add a string to a string, and the binary operator is not really working because the reason it's not working right now is because it doesn't know that there's a value there because it's an optional value. Again, I'll get into that a little bit later, but if I just do this, we'll see if this solves it. Okay, yeah, so that solves it for now. And I'm going to show you why this solves it and explain how this is working. Basically, this lesson is going to cover a ton of different things. So I'm going to take it sort of beat by beat. All right, so we've added these things together, and we had to add this exclamation point. The easiest way to talk about this is that we have a data type like right, we all understand this basic setup. We have the variable declaration, the name of the variable that we've determined, and then we have the data typing. So the type here is called string. So this is a string. We're saying, hey, this variable can only hold string data. It's the only thing we're going to pass through it is string. It's a string of characters, right? Basically, we're going to pass through this. And this is the value right now, which is high. Okay, we have other values up here like UI text field. That's a data type. We've worked with other data types like variable or integers, right? So that's an example of it's an integer. So sometimes you'll see data types that will have question marks on them, like this, or they'll have exclamation points, like what we have up here. Now, I'm not going to cover the exclamation points today because honestly, it's just not super important for our purposes in this class. But the question marks are something that trips up tons of people. And these question marks mean optionals. It means that this is a string optional data type. So it's no longer just a string, it's a string optional. And what that means, if something is a string optional, or if it's any data type optional, that means it doesn't actually have to have a value. So this would be a totally valid way of declaring this. In fact, let's go ahead and just have that line going. What that means is we've declared a variable called string variable, and we know that it's the type of string, right? We know that's the data type, but it doesn't have a value. Before, we've been working with things like this, where it already has a value at the beginning. By declaring it with a question mark, with an optional, we're saying it doesn't have to have a value. It can have a value of what we call nil, okay? So nil means no value. It doesn't mean zero or the absence. It means that there is no value to this. Now, why is that important? So for us, we might have things that we would declare at some point as optionals because they may not have values yet. For example, whenever we start our program, these UI text fields don't actually have any value, right? Let's go back to our storyboard. these are empty right now. Whenever I look at the UI text field .text, right, there's that .text .syntax right here. This .text is technically a string optional. That's because by default it has no value, right? There's no value in this until we actually boot it up. There's nothing in here, and until our user actually types something in, there's no value. It's nil. So that makes sense, right? Okay, well, of course, there's no value, but later we'll be giving it a value, right? We're assuming that later the user is going to type in numbers in here and hit that plus button. But what this is saying is if we don't have these, it's not going to let us add these numbers together. It's not going to let us add two optionals together because there's a possibility that those could both be nil, and if they are in fact nil, it's going to crash our program. So we can think of optionals as like gift wrapping. That's the common way to think of them. So optionals equal gift wrapping. I know this is a lot for one video, but I'm trying to just sort of cover all my bases, and then we can dive deeper into these in future chapters. So we're saying that this doesn't have a value right now, but later, whenever we execute it, it needs to have a value, right? This needs to have a value whenever we eventually execute it, and that's what the exclamation point means. The exclamation point means force unwrapping. So we can think of optionals, right, which are question marks, as the wrapping, and we're saying there's something in this package, and this says we're going to force unwrap it. We are going to unwrap that package and see what's inside, and we expect there to be a value there. Now, best case, best practice, you actually don't really want to use these. There's a whole bunch of ways to go about doing this, in particular using if statements or guard statements, which we'll get into many videos down the line. But for now, what you need to know is that this is a very often problem, like a very common problem that's going to come up is going to say, you need to unwrap this, or you can't add two optional values together, or you can't do yada, yada, yada. And you need to include that exclamation point to say, go ahead and unwrap it. I expect there to be a value there. There's going to be a number there whenever we need to run this. So go ahead and expect that value and unwrap that optional.